Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mindfulness Podcast. This is Ankita Biani, your host. Today, for episode 3 of the Mindfulness Podcast, we have a special guest to help us understand more about the benefits of mindfulness and meditation practice, especially on coping with the pandemic and its post-effects, as well as examples of mindful practices. Dr. Quinn Conklin is a postdoctoral scholar at the University of California, Davis Center for Mind and Brain, studying meditation and stress biology. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Quinn Conklin.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Conklin, for being a guest on this podcast series. Today, we would like to address the benefits of mindfulness and meditation practice, especially on coping with the pandemic and its post-effects, as well as examples of mindfulness practices that we are familiar with.
Yeah. I probably have two different points of view to offer here. One being my own personal experience through the pandemic and being someone who meditates somewhat regularly and kind of how I've incorporated that into my own well-being throughout the pandemic. And then my lab and I are also conducting a study following about 350 or so folks throughout a year of the pandemic. And so we spent a year collecting survey data from people who have some experience with meditation. And the study was focused on mental health, stress, and well-being throughout the pandemic. And we wanted to know how people were incorporating their meditation practice. So this is a particular pool of people who had had some exposure to meditation before, but we didn't assign any sort of practice. We wanted to know what people were doing naturally of their own accord and how that fit into their well-being throughout the pandemic. So which would you like to hear about first?
I would like to hear more about the studies that you've kind of done in the pandemic and how mindfulness and meditation can help with coping on that, because that sounds very, very interesting.
Yeah. So we have just begun the data analysis side of things, and so we will have much more to say over the coming years and coming months, coming years. Particularly with respect to how people benefit individually. So one of the things that we did was to collect a lot of qualitative self-report and got people to describe their experience in their own words. But that sort of data analysis tends to take a bit longer. And so that's something we'll have to come back to maybe in a future episode or something like that. But the one sort of tidbit that I can say right now is that we do see a relationship between how often people are practicing and how they score on a self-report measure of psychological well-being. So we asked people to fill out a whole set of questionnaires, many of which were what are called standardized self-report instruments, and they measure things like, well, in this case, we're measuring mental health related constructs. And so things like anxiety, depression, psychological well-being, resilience. So in the case of the data that we've looked at so far, we looked at answers to the psychological well-being scale, which asks questions like, how often did you feel happy or interested in life or satisfied? So what we find is a relationship, a positive relationship between how often people are practicing, and that means how many days per week are they practicing, and how they score on this self-report instrument. So higher psychological well-being being related to greater practice. One of the things we don't know yet is what's driving that relationship? So you could, on the one hand, imagine that more meditation practice is leading to greater psychological well-being. On the other hand, you could imagine that people who are better off already on the psychological well-being score or scale are able to practice more often. So maybe there are fewer hindrances, obstacles, or they are in some way more resourced and able to maintain more regular meditation practice. So in this particular case, we can't exactly tease apart those two possibilities because we have what's called correlational data. And so we're not looking at which one is causing the other. In the future, I do think we'll be able to say a little bit more about the directionality there as we start to look at more of the time points that we've assessed. So far, we've only analyzed data from the very first time point in our year-long study, but we followed up with folks every 4 years throughout, we followed up with folks every 4 months throughout a 1-year period. And so by analyzing some of those later time points, we might be able to see some sort of directionality in that relationship.
That is very, very interesting. So basically, from my understanding, what has been seen so far in the study is that the more you are practicing or the longer you are practicing, that's kind of correlating to positive well-being.
Yeah, and specifically, the more often you are practicing so far, one of the things that we haven't looked at yet is how much they're practicing in a given sit or day. And so you could imagine that there might be differences, if people are practicing 5 minutes versus an hour a day. But what we have so far is how many days per week are they practicing, and how does that relate to this?
Okay, got it. So this is very, very interesting. And I guess this is a great segue for our next question, because since we're on the topic of practicing frequently, a lot of people have been asking me, like, what are some mindfulness practices that you're familiar with that can be done anywhere, anytime? Because some people, have very busy schedules. So I was wondering if you have any examples of practices that you can do anywhere, anytime.
Well, I think most meditation practices could probably be done anywhere, anytime. At least the ones that I can imagine. But I do think that different schools of practice kind of come at this from different angles. And so there are styles of practice that kind of emphasize this bringing it into daily life and doing it anywhere that you are. What's occurring to me right now is that I think one of the things that helps people practice more regularly is having a group or some cues that help sort of facilitate that practice. So it might be a group. I say group because that's one of the things that has worked for me in having a regular group that I sit with in the mornings. And this has been made more possible by Zoom and having this kind of regular group that I can check into on Zoom. So it doesn't matter where in the world I am. It doesn't matter where they are. We just choose a time and meet together to practice for about 45 minutes every morning. Other things that you can do to kind of build that continuity is choosing a time of day that you consistently practice or a location that you practice in. This room that I'm in here is often the room that I will practice in, and I set it up in a way that sort of helps me remember. So I come in here to water my plants every morning, and that reminds me that this room exists, these plants exist, and oh yeah, it's probably a good time for me to take a few minutes and spend some time meditating. But you're asking also more specifically about types of practice. And there are many different types. The sort of classical anchor that gets described often in Buddhist traditions is paying attention to the breath, and noticing the quality of the breath, and training your mind to attend with some continuity to the sensations of the breath. And that works for a lot of folks, and it doesn't work for some folks too. And so the communities that I've practiced with more recently are actually sort of a blend of Buddhist traditions with some interweaving of Western psychological science. And so what is now kind of termed trauma-informed mindfulness really takes a view of somewhat broadening those anchors, and so giving more possibilities. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent right now, so I'm going to try and circle back here. But what I wanted to kind of suggest is that the attention to the breath can also be anchored to other aspects, other possible anchors that can help you focus your attention. So another classical one is the flame of a candle. So it could be considered a visual anchor rather than physical sensations. It's auditory is another possible channel. So you can listen to the soundscape. In this space that I'm in right now, I have this clock that I can hear kind of regularly ticking in the background. And essentially what that anchor is doing is giving you something to bring your mind back to and create a sense of stability in your attention. So it's very common for our minds to wander, whether it be about, the homework you have to do, or what are we going to have for dinner, or, oh, that last interaction I just had with someone else. That's what minds do. They think, they create thought, they kind of wander. And so whatever anchor you can kind of work with, and that's different for everyone, but something that helps you kind of stabilize your mind and bring your attention back over and over and over is kind of what I think of as my most common practice at this point. And I often will play with lots of different anchors and kind of build a space that has multiple anchors in it that work for me. But another practice I know we've talked about is if we think of the more what people are now calling relational mindfulness, there's a practice that I do with the group that I sit with. So Dharma Homies are the group that I sit with online every morning, and they like to end every session with what we call a gratitude round. And so that often looks like everyone going around the circle and saying one thing that they feel grateful for in a given moment. And there's a really big range of what shows up for people in that. But it's a really beautiful practice. And the relational part of it is not only taking the time out to think about what you are grateful for, but also to take in and observe what other folks are grateful for and what that impact has on you when you hear what other people are sharing. So I'll pause there for a minute. I could say a little bit more about any of those things, but what are you interested in?
Yeah, I was going to comment that yes, I really like your idea of finding and including many different types of anchors as your way of mindfulness practice, because I know, like for me, I like to do a breathing exercise because it's something doable anywhere and it works for me. But I know, like for example, for some of my friends and family, that doesn't quite work for them. So they like doing things as you suggested, like the auditory or the visual types of anchors, like listening to calming music or listening to your environment, and just kind of taking the time to be fully aware of your presence. And I think that's why I love mindfulness so much, because there are so many different ways to practice it and incorporate it into your life and get the most optimal results and benefits from it. And also, the thing about practicing in groups, I think that's a wonderful idea, and I never really thought about it before. Like, for example, I know some of us might want to take the initiative to do mindfulness, but we may never find the time or may never get to it. But I think when you do it in a group, that really reinforces the actions, and it makes you think about, okay, this is what I'm doing right now, and this is why I'm doing it. So it makes you understand and feel really the purpose of mindfulness. So I definitely agree and resonate with your words.
Great. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's something about the accountability of other people, showing up also, and that shared motivation that can be really supportive. Um, yeah.
Yes, and for the audience out there, I did want to mention that Dr. Conklin has mentioned the IBEM program. It's an amazing resource for adolescents and even parents and adults and teachers. IBEM's mission is to provide in-depth, highly relational mindfulness programming for the youth, parents, and professionals. And basically, its programs guide participants in developing self-awareness, compassion, and ethical decision making, and empowers them to apply these skills in improving their lives and communities. And nowadays, I believe that these skills are very necessary to growing to your full potential and being and trying the best that you can do. And if you search up IB and then me as an ME, click on the first link, the website will show up. And the link will also be provided in the podcast episode description details, but I just wanted to put that out there as a great resource. It's amazing. Um,
Yeah. And the IBME stands for Inward Bound Mindfulness. So that might help folks find that resource.
Definitely. And thank you so much, Dr. Conklin, for your words. They are very helpful, and I resonate with them. And I hope the audience really does, get a different insight into mindfulness and how, even though sometimes certain anchors might not work, you can explore more and still be able to practice it and get the benefits and reduce stress and find that balance that works for you.
Yeah, I think there are lots of options to bring you into the present moment. And so it's worth experimenting a little bit with what doorways work for you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for being our guest speaker. So that's it for episode 3 of the Mindfulness Podcast, everyone. We hope you enjoyed, and please don't forget to like and subscribe and spread the word so more can understand and enjoy mindfulness practices and stay in tune with themselves. Also, everyone, there is a Google Forms link in the episode description, so please feel free and don't hesitate to fill it out if you would love to share what you learned from this podcast or how it has helped you, and if you have any comments to add. Thank you, everyone, for joining.